Peace and divine love. I am Elaine Destiny-Bey, and today I want to talk about our beloved ancestor, Sarah Baartman, Saraji Baartman, Hottentot Venus. I wrote a children's book based on her story, and it's right here. You can see the picture in the background, but this is the book, the Sarah Baartman story, Hottentot Venus. Elaine Destiny-Bey, which is the author, me, and illustrated by Victoria Parks. So, who is Sarah Baartman? Some may not even know her at all. She was a woman from the Coco tribe of Cape Town, South Africa, who was forced against her will to go to Europe to be exhibited in a freak show. But most of us know her for her curvaceous body and her big buttocks. She was a full-figured, curvaceous woman. She was more than just her looks. She actually had an interesting story. So, who is Sarah Baartman? She was born the year of 1789 or 1790. She had a mother and father. She had 5 or 6 siblings, brothers and sisters. Her mother died when she was young. She was a little girl when her mother died. Her mother was a servant. She worked hard, done hard labor, and she died from hard work. So her father was forced to take care of the children. Her father was a cattle. He had raised cattle, and he sold cattle. So the father would go back and forth into the city, and during that time, in the early 1700s, the late 1700s, early 1800s, it was a tribal war it was the tribal people amongst the Europeans that was coming in there trying to divide and conquer the land and take over the land. So it was a lot of the tribal people that were getting killed and murdered during that time. So, on this particular day, the father, he was, from what I've studied, the father would tell all kinds of stories about their tribe and history and so forth like that. And he would go back and forth through the city to get money, and to help feed his family. But this particular day, he went into the city and he did not return. He was murdered on his cattle run into the city. He never came back. So the family was forced to split up and go to, different ways. And Sarah, she ended up going to her servant, back then was Peter Caesar. And she worked as a maid, domestic stuff. Then his brother, Hendrik Caesar, him and his wife, they were married for several years, could not conceive. She could not bear children, Hendrik's wife. So they were free, so-called black people, during that time, and she adopted a few children. So during that time, Peter told Hendrik about Sarah, and so Sarah went to go and serve and help with the domestic things with her new, I guess you would say, master, Hendrik Caesar, which is the brother of Peter Caesar. So she went over there to help with the domestic things. The wife of Hendrik Caesar, they adopted a baby during that time, and the baby was still nursing, very young child. Sarah would do her domestic things. She would take care of the children. And then I guess, she had some free time. Sarah was very outgoing. She enjoyed going um, to the, I would say, the bars. Back then, that was probably the thing to do. Some of the Cocoa women would go over there to the Navy Post or the bars, and they would entertain the foreigners or entertain the army men. So for my research, she went, that was like her hangout and social life. She went to um, the bars, and she can sing. She was very talented. She can dance. She had her tribal dance that they used to do. Her very voluptuous body. I guess you can say she was probably the head, like brought a lot of attention, especially to those foreigners or Europeans that came in. They were just fascinated by the tribal women, by their looks, their hair, their nose, their breasts, their butts, and so that was her hangout spot. And for my study, Sarah did have a long term boyfriend, and some say she was married prior to getting separated from her family and so forth. They say she was married at a young age, early teens, and they said that her husband was a drummer, and he was killed, and that was in her early teens. But as she lived with her master Hendrik, she went into the town, the bars, and she met this young man who, from my research, he served in the military or had something to. He had some type of occupation that he helped with the military. And they said Sarah used to spend a lot of time with this man. And during that time, she was in love with this man. They said that this man gave her a tortoise pendant that she used to wear around her neck. And she conceived a child with this man. And as she was still going into the town, she was also by day working with Hendrik Caesar and his wife, taking care of the children. And she would go into the town and sing and dance. That was her thing to do. She did stay. From my research, she did live a particular time with her boyfriend at the time. She did live with him, and she continued to go back and forth and work for Hendrik Caesar. She conceived a child with this young man, and they stayed together, I guess, for a few years. The child died, at an infant age, I guess around 2 or 3 years old, from, they say, high fever or natural causes. So um, during that time, I guess, of death of a child, put strain on her relationship with this young man, and they end up breaking up. So when they broke up, um, she was devastated from the loss of her child, and they broke up, and she never saw him again. Um, she went back to live with Hendrik Caesar and his wife, and she continued to breastfeed the children and take care of the duties of as being a servant. So at that particular time, her master, Hendrik Caesars, worked for a doctor named Dulip. And Dr. Dulip, he served on a military base, seeing the military people, that were sick or injured and stuff like that. He worked for England. And at that time, some things were going on, and they, his contract was up. They wanted him to go back to England. And so Hendrik Caesar, that was, his source of income, working for Dr. Dulip at that time. So his job was on the line, and his livelihood. And, he had these children to take care of, and his wife. And they say that Hendrik was a free black person back then, but he didn't have really education. So he did what he could to survive. So by Sarah going into the bars and hanging around the military base, Dr. Dulip had an idea. He was very, very fascinated by Sarah's physical appearance. So he knew that he was getting ready to get deported back to England, and they were running out of a source of income. So the opportunity was, they saw Sarah, and it was like their meal ticket, their golden ticket. So Dr. Dulip came up with an idea and presented it to Hendrik Caesar, that they could take Sarah to Europe to basically be exhibited in a freak show, some type of circus show, because back then Europeans, they heard of Hottentot people. That's their nickname. Was kind of derogatory, but they nicknamed the Cocoa tribe people, especially the women, Hottentot. They were fascinated by those type of women because of their physical features of being curvaceous, broad hips, big buttocks, breast, very earthly, just very curvish, full lips, just very, the African features was very unknown to Europeans. The typical European standard of beauty, because there's nothing compared. You can't compare a European woman to an African woman. It's just it's uncomparable. So back then, they saw pictures of the Cocoa tribe women, they were very fascinated just by African women in general. So the golden opportunity was they wanted to get Sarah. They wanted to get her over to Europe so that they can make money off her, use her. And she was just a golden opportunity, somewhat of, let's put her on display. And let's use her. Let's make money off of her. So what they did was they presented to Sarah, Hendrik Caesar and Dr. Dulip told Sarah, hey, what we're gonna do, we want to offer you a good opportunity to travel to Europe and become famous, and make lots of money. They promised her riches and fame, that she'd just be this famous person and she'll make so much money that her life will change dramatically. Sarah came from a background where she didn't have much, and her family, they all separated. Her father died, so she didn't really have any siblings, or kind of didn't really have a choice. She didn't, there was hardly any work back then, so they gave her, they sold her on a dream, and so allegedly they presented to Sarah a contract that if she goes to Europe and um, be exhibited for 5 years, she could have all this money and come back to Cape Town and live out her life and live out her dreams. She would have money to afford anything that she wanted. So she was sort of, I would say, manipulated and forced upon her will, because she did not know exactly what was happening. Back then, Sarah could not read and write, so she didn't know what she was signing, or what she was really getting into, and she didn't really have a choice, So back then, there was a law that the tribal people could not, from I would say, the governor at that time, did not want the tribal people to leave the land. It was forbidden. It was against the law for the tribal people to leave during that time. I would say, what was that, 1810? So Dr. Dulip and Caesar, they got all their I would say their souvenirs and stuff that they were going to bring back from South Africa to Europe. And one of those things that they wanted to bring to England was giraffe skin and some other bones and jewelry and things from South Africa to sell for money. And so back then, giraffe skin was high priced. So what they did was they smuggled Sarah Baartman. They smuggled her on the ship. Probably paid the people to not say anything, and they smuggled her on the ship. I guess she was probably covered in giraffe skin or something like that, or with the luggage. So they smuggled her on the ship, and back then, I guess that trip was about a month. It wasn't no fast journey from Cape Town to England. It was about a month trip. So she was practically smuggled on there. Who knows what she was thinking during that time? Probably a little anxious of what to expect when she made it to England. So she made it to England, and I think that was the late spring of 1810. And when she made it there, she was very fascinated with the culture, the European culture back then. So they kind of got settled in. It was, you know, trying to find a way to start this show. So I think it was probably a few months after she arrived that the Hottentot Venus show started. And so they went shopping for costumes for Sarah Baartman. Her costume consists of stockings. It was like a tan stocking suit that was very tight for her body, very sheer. And they wanted to show off her curves and her buttocks. So she was it was damn near nude, almost. Um, and she practiced that Hottentot Venus show for a while. They said that the first night, the Hottentot Venus show was a major hit for them. She would dance. She would do her tribal dance, and they made her seem as if she was like a wild animal, like she really didn't have common sense, a savage, and they would, try to frighten the audience, like, oh, this African woman, this Hottentot, she's out of control, and stuff like that. She danced. She played um, her instrument, which was the two string violin. She was displayed in a cage, with sort of like you know um, like a dog leash around um, her neck, and they made her walk like a dog and stuff like that. And the most degrading thing was her butt, her butt, her buttocks. They made her turn her behind towards the audience, and one by one, people could come up and basically touch this woman's buttocks, and touch her. Touch her body parts, and basically degrade this woman. And night after night, probably I think 7 days a week, or if it wasn't 7 days or 6 days, she worked 12-hour days, 12 hours a day. This Hottentot Venus show. She didn't really have any free time. They ran with it. That was Hendrik Caesar and Dr. Dulip's source of income. I guess they gave her pennies on the dollar compared to what they were making off this show. So back then, in the 1800s, there was the abolition movement. um, People back then, slavery was definitely illegal in England in 1810. So when people that were anti against slavery, they were basically they thought that Sarah was being forced against her free will to be exhibited on the show. So Hendrik Caesar and Dr. Dulip, they were summoned to court. I believe a year after that, they were summoned to court to justify if this woman was being forced against her will to be exhibited. So, Sarah, whether she wanted to or not, she did have a choice to continue to be exhibited and degraded and used and stuff like that. She She did make a court appearance once, and the judge basically asked Sarah, was she being forced against her will, and if she wanted to go back home to Cape Town. And was she being treated fairly? Was she getting her earnings from the show that they made every night? And so Sarah, I don't know if she was I don't know if she was, if they kind of coached her on saying these things when she went to court, but basically, she told the courts that no, this is what she wanted to do, and she did it on her free will, and she was like acting. Basically, that's what she told the court. She did not want to go back home until she finished her contract. So the case was dismissed, and that was it. You know, nobody questioned it. She said she wanted to be there, so if she did want to go back home, she had the opportunity. But I believe that she knew that if she went back home, there was no money. She didn't have no family, so basically, this woman was broken, and she was basically holding on to a dream that she'd become rich and she'd be able to go home, back to her hometown one day. And I believe she did like the attention. She was sort of like, during that time, 1810, 1811, 1812, she was a famous, like, superstar in England. Everybody knew of the Hottentot Venus show. She continued to tour Europe. She went to England, France, Ireland, different parts of Europe, and they had a successful show. But Sarah, you know, every night, I believe she couldn't really take the pressure. It was like very stressed on her to be exhibited as a freak, some type of circus or some type of animal. So how she got through her pain was she used to drink. She used to drink. She would drink to get through her pain. And, being humiliated, having strangers touch you every night, and being treated as an animal, I can see, how she was dehumanized, and, that was her way of coping, trying to escape the reality of her situation. So she used drinking as a source of numbing herself. So as she continued to tour Europe, she got pneumonia and the flu. The climate is so different than it is in South Africa. It gets cold out in Europe, so she wasn't used to the climate change. In her drinking, and she did smoke tobacco. She had a pipe. Her health started declining. She would get frequently, I guess you would say, upper respiratory infections and so forth like that, and due to the fact that she didn't get enough rest. She was, like I said, working 12 to 18-hour days, 7 days a week with no rest. Her health would go up and down. So, during that time, I believe it was years later, Dr. Doolittle had died sometime. I believe it was 1813 or 14. And Hendrik Caesar, I guess he was missing his wife and children, and things start to escalate as Sarah Baartman, her health was declining, and things were changing in that show business. They weren't getting enough ticket sales and so forth like that. So I believe in it was 1815. Hendrik Caesar, um, he sold Sarah to Rux. Um, and Rux, during that time, they ran into a man named Rux. He was like an animal trainer. So Hendrik Caesar sold Sarah to Rux and basically left her out to dry. He left her there in England and went back with all the earnings from the show and went back to South Africa, Cape Town, and left Sarah Baartman there with Rux. So she was sold to Rux in 1815, and from my research, Rux would went downhill since then. He would just basically, degrade her even worse. She would, he would tell her to bark or jump up and down, like a wild animal. Basically, you know, letting people see her private parts, and and it went downhill. So during that time, there was a professor, um, Professor Carvier. He had saw the Hottentot being a show, and he wanted to basically do an examination on the Hottentot Venus. He was fascinated by the African woman. He wanted to link her. If there was a link between an African woman and an ape or an animal, he wanted to know like who was smarter. Basically, he was saying that African people were savages. They just was uneducated, animal-like people. So they Rux agreed that Sarah would go to Professor Carvier and his crew to be examined. So, of course, they paid Rux some money, or else he wouldn't have done it. This is like, I believe, 1815. So she went down there. They took photographs. Um, uh, Sarah was very modest. They wanted her to completely get naked so that they can see her vaginal area. They wanted to see her buttocks. They wanted to measure her hips. They measured her head. Asked her a series of different questions, but they wanted to get this lady naked. And one thing about Sarah is she went, but she refused her to have all of her dignity taken away from her. So she refused to take her towel off all the way to let them basically look at her vagina, and she didn't want it. She wasn't having it. So they did all that they can do during that time when they tried to examine Sarah. So after that ended, Sarah didn't really do too many shows in 1815 because her health was declining, and they say that Sarah was, Rux had turned her out to prostitute. She didn't have any source of income, so they say she basically drank every night and basically prostitute her body. She didn't have anywhere to go. She couldn't go back home. She didn't have any relatives or probably any friends that she can trust besides, Ruck, her master. So she'll result into prostituting for money. And this particular, you know, winter day, they said she was very sick up and down with upper respiratory infections and stuff, and frequent cough. So this particular winter day, I would say 1816 is when she passed away. She died. She died in her home in 1815. It was December, I remember, but she died in her home in 1815 of, they say, pneumonia, syphilis, or some type of kidney failure. Like I said, back then, prostituting and syphilis was a well-known disease, and she probably contracted it. She died. So upon her, this is a 5-year time timeline. From 1810 to 1815, she was about 20. She died at the age of 25 years old. She was very young. But so upon her death, I believe Rux, he had access to. They said she married him, so who knows? We don't quite know for sure. I haven't seen a marriage contract. They say she married Rux, and he probably did that because he's seen dollar signs. But upon her death, he somehow the authorities, and probably Rux signed over his right to let Professor Xavier dissect her and put her body in a cast. So upon her death, he wanted to see her body. He was fascinated by Sarah Baartman's body. And due to the fact that he could not see it when she was alive, he was like, I'm going to he finally got what he wanted, and that was to see her precious, private body parts. So what he did was he dissected her body parts, her genitals, her brain, to be on display. He pickled them and, basically put them in a jar. He put her body in a cast, and that was it. She had her body cast. That was the Sarah Baartman cast that they made, and pickled her genitals and her brain, and basically her body parts in that cast was put on display until 1974. From 1815 to 1974, she was basically, still dehumanized. But she, couldn't rest in peace. Body after her death, still on display for the world to see. And it's such, a sad story, for her body to be on display like that, and people, Europeans were still fascinated with that. So, I believe France had her body parts for 200 years, over 200 years, until President Nelson Mandela in Cape Town, officials wrote a letter to the French government to release her body parts so she could be laid to rest in her homeland. So, people were still back then still hearing her story, and her story was becoming more popular, and this woman's body parts was still held hostage, and she could not properly have, be laid to rest and have peace. So, President Nelson Mandela um, sent a letter to the French government to release, and they finally released her body parts in the year 2002. And she was able to be laid to rest in Cape Town. They had a memorial for her, and she was properly buried. And 200 years later. So, I mean, it's really a sad story, but Sarah Baartman didn't have a choice. Like I said, her family died, and she didn't have any siblings. She just died of a broken heart. Her baby, her infant died, her baby died, and her, long-term boyfriend left, and just died of a broken heart. She had to resort to prostituting and being on display like an animal. She didn't have a choice back then, and now I just know that it's so important to be the voice of Sarah Baartman and spread this message, because now we have young girls just openly displaying themselves, and the black woman is still being put on display, and as this freak, the freak show. You see it on the billboards, you see it on the videos, you see it on the magazines, and you see it on social media. I go on social media, that's all I see is twerking and half naked women, and it's just like, this is what it result to, that the African woman, the mother of civilization, is just result to her big butt and her looks, and this freak. And I just think, I know that it's important to promote her story, and let young girls know that they are more than their bodies. We can get anything we want if we put our minds to it, and we don't have to openly and subject ourselves to this sexual object to anybody, you know, that you are more than just that, your body. We are beautiful, melanated women, and we need to put ourselves out there and have more positive images. And although you may see those images of Sarah Baartman's big behind, this is the most positive image of Sarah Baartman. Playing the violin. She was very intelligent. She spoke 4 different languages: English, Dutch, French, and her native tongue. They say she had a photographic memory. She can remember anything that you tell her. So, what they put out there of Sarah Baartman, her image and what she was, some type of freak, and she came over there on a boat to be displayed. I just wanted to put this out there and let her story be heard. Give her a voice, and acknowledge this woman. Acknowledge her and promote a positive look and tell her story, because she was just more than some freak show. She was more than a freak show. She was our sister. And just getting to know who Sarah Saraji Baartman who she was as a melanated African princess. And so I want to spread this message. If you want a copy of this book, you can go to Amazon and get your copy. So I want to spread that word, and I hope you enjoyed the story and share it with others. And have a good one. You can catch me on Facebook, Elaine Destiny-Bey, or DestinyNatural.com, and stay tuned. Keep in touch. Peace.